Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Bituation Room. Frantastic Friday with me, Francesca Fiorentini. Hope you guys are so good. Just going to adjust my camera a little bit. I think I just readjusted it back. It's been quite a week, and there's been so much to talk about. Wednesday, we had a fun bonus episode, talked a little bit about the Olympics and how fragile men are. What is a man? I don't think anyone can define it at this point. So make sure to become a patron, patreon.com/bituationroom to get access to that and all of our back episodes. But you know how we roll on Fridays. Sometimes it's just me speaking into the void by myself with you, lovely Frantifa, at my back. And sometimes it's a deep dive, a great discussion with different people from all facets of my curiosity, I think. And today, because of the news this week, I'm so delighted to have Trita Parsi on, who is the executive vice president for the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. He has been on the show before, so going to bring him on in 2 seconds, only to ask you right now to subscribe on YouTube to this show, to become a member, and also get access to that bonus content. But Patreon is where you go to get all the sweet rewards. I'm going to find a time to do an AMA. I'm very stacked with a lot of TYT appearances. So if you miss me, I'll be on there a lot in the next couple weeks, running my mouth. But like and share the stream, do all the things, support the show if you can. Also support Cori Bush's re-election campaign. The primary's on Tuesday, y'all. We got a lot of work to do. Let's protect Cori Bush from AIPAC and Republican money. And now, again, as I said, Quincy Institute Responsible Statecraft. Is that such a thing anymore? Can we ever be responsible in our statecraft? Executive Vice President of that institute. This is going to be the longest, most obnoxious intro in the world, Trita. But Trita Parsi. Trita, welcome back.
Thank you for having me again. Could I do one thing first? Can I let my dog out?
Yeah.
Oh my
God.
Some noise. One second.
Who let the dogs out? Trita did right now. Yeah, your pets are always sleeping and you're like, you'll be fine there. And then as soon as you need to go.
As soon as the show starts, yeah.
Right. They're like, ooh, and you're like, where was this 2 minutes ago? We love that Trita has a dog because you speak of American foreign policy and Middle East foreign policy. You need just dog therapy in your life. So I'm glad you have one.
Oh my God. Only thing that keeps me sane.
This has been a crazy week because, well, look, we're about a week out from, let's just say, Bibi Netanyahu speaking in front of Congress. Yes, many Democrats boycotted. But in that speech, he basically was like, zero mention of a ceasefire, didn't even say the word, like, hey, there might be more war and you need to back me up on this. So should we be surprised that, lo and behold, this week, Israel assassinated, yes, journalists, but also Fouad Shukr in Beirut, who's one of the leaders of Hezbollah, and then Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, who is one of the leaders of Hamas. So here's that wider war being stoked. But I want to just take this part by part, Trita, with you. Let's first talk about Ismail Haniyeh and the assassination of him right in Tehran, hours after the inauguration of the new president. Why? Tell us about Haniyeh, and why does it matter that he specifically was targeted?
Well, Haniyeh is the political head of Hamas, but he is not operationally important in Gaza himself. In fact, there's video evidence that he actually did not even know about the October attacks until it happened. They kept him in the dark for that. He is also someone, incidentally, that the United States wanted to have contact with. And that's part of the reason the Bush administration in 2006 asked the Qatari government to host the Hamas office in Doha. And that's where he has been ever since. Now, a lot of Republicans are complaining, why is he in Doha? Well, he's in Doha because we asked the Qatari government to have him there because we needed a way of being able to communicate with Hamas. Despite all of the rhetoric, oh, we don't talk to evil, blah, 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 blah. That's what we needed. So in terms of what happens on the ground in Gaza, it does not really seem to have much of an impact at all. But if you want to send the clearest possible message that you are not interested in a ceasefire, killing the negotiator on the other side of the table is probably the most clear signal you possibly could send.
Yeah, and because he was one of the lead negotiators on a possible ceasefire deal.
Absolutely. He's the person that the Qataris and the Egyptians have been negotiating with, and so has the US, but indirectly through the mediation of Qatar and Egypt. And the idea that just about 2 days before this, the head of the Mossad was meeting with Bill Burns, the head of the CIA, as part of the negotiations for a ceasefire. Now, that reality, combined with the fact that Netanyahu just came back from Washington, the reality that the US has already sent more ships to the region before this happened, leaves a lot of people in the region with the impression that the Biden administration was in on it. I'm not convinced. I think there's clear evidence that suggests that, but I don't think is necessarily a concluded case. I think there's an alternative explanation. But nevertheless, if you're in the region, you're quite likely to believe that because of this.
Even though the head of Mossad, the head of the CIA are meeting ostensibly to talk about, not about, like you're implying that meeting was not about like, hey, let's assassinate a Hamas leader. It was about ceasefire. And then this happened. So maybe Netanyahu's gone rogue. Maybe he whispered something in Biden's ear.
Netanyahu's gone rogue a long time ago. The only thing is that Biden administration pretends that it has some sort of coordination with it. Pretends that it is using its influence in these mythological closed meetings in which apparently Biden is being tough.
Right.
I mean, perhaps he is, but unless we see evidence of it having a result, I don't think he's being tough enough. And then I don't care what those readouts say and what those leaks to the media say.
Yeah.
So, for instance, the readout of his call with Biden Netanyahu yesterday said nothing about any pressure on Israel not to escalate. And I mean, it was a shocking readout, given the fact that Netanyahu just did something that very well appears designed to start a broader war designed to suck the US into it. And don't take it from me, take it from the Deputy National Security Council head of Israel itself, who served under Netanyahu, who tweeted this, saying that Netanyahu is trying to start a large war and he wants the US to get sucked into it.
Yeah.
So if that has happened and the readout only says that, and then afterwards, the day afterward, Axios has a story about how tough Biden actually was in that meeting and that he actually did say, demand that Netanyahu shouldn't escalate further. But well, you've been doing this for 10 months and this little silly game hasn't worked. Either you actually put some real pressure, which means threatening to stop all the arms sales, or actually stopping all of the arms sales. And you also put red lines in front of Netanyahu publicly.
Yeah,
to raise the cost for him, not just to do this, but also raise for the cost for him to do so internally in Israel. But the Biden administration has shown no inclination to do so, and that has incentivized Netanyahu to do whatever he wants.
Look, I am on record saying that I wish that Biden would step down now and Kamala Harris be acting president now. In part for these reasons, and not because, and I'm sure you have opinions, Kamala Harris would be so different, but the idea that Biden was stern in a meeting after the debate performance, given what we've seen in public, do we have any confirmation that he even got a sentence out coherently and cogently that said anything relevant at all? I cannot imagine feeling under threat by Joe Biden, not only in his demeanor, and his, again, inability to sort of communicate toughness, but also because he's a ideologically committed Zionist and truly believes Israel can do whatever he wants and has regurgitated that for 10 months. Nothing seems to change him. But so this wider war, which, again, my God, this election couldn't come soon enough, because you, maybe 3 months into all this, came on this show and we're basically saying the same thing. Where's the red line? What's going to go? This is already when there were retaliatory attacks from, I think, Iran-backed groups in Iraq on American troops. And you have written again that you are concerned about that possibility. Let's pause right there when it comes to the U.S. and talk about Hezbollah. There was also the assassination of Shukr in Beirut. Also, this is the capital of Lebanon. This is such a provocatory action. But what does that mean when it comes to an all-out war with Hezbollah, and what is the calculation there in Israel?
So right before this assassination, all of the buzz was, what will happen now? Will Hezbollah respond? And will Iran be part of that response? That conversation is gone because now it's the fact that Iran is going to respond to the assassination of Hania because it happened in Tehran. And it's a given that the Hezbollah will be involved one way or another. In fact, now it seems quite likely that there will be some element of coordination between the Houthis, Hezbollah, Iran, and some of these militias in Iraq and Syria. So, and we had a similar but not identical situation in April after the Israelis struck the Iranian embassy in Damascus. And there was a response, but there was coordination, some choreography to make sure that the Iranians responded. There would be a very minimal Israeli response, and that would be the end of it. That's the only instance where we actually see Biden put real pressure on the Israelis. And guess what? It worked. And it raised question marks. Where have you been for the last 7 months? Why didn't you do this earlier? You could have done this. You could have done it so easily. Early in the war, an Israeli general said, if the Americans stop sending ammunition and bombs, we will have to stop the war within 5 days. The idea that we don't have leverage is insulting. We have it. The problem is that we have a president that has refused to use it. I mean, there's a scenario in which all of these different actors that will do something unlike the last time in which the Iranians deliberately tried to minimize human casualties.
Right.
This time around, the language out of Tehran and Hezbollah is very different. They're talking about blood for blood. They're raising red flags at the mosque, which is a symbolism of revenge. But this time around, it doesn't seem like they're going to try to minimize casualties to zero. There will be some. And then the question is, what will Israel do after that? The readout says, Axios says that Biden has promised that, if Israel escalates from that point, U.S. will not support it. But let's be frank. If you were Netanyahu, would you take what Biden is saying seriously?
Right. Well, and especially if there's no cutoff of weapons, if there's no arms embargo, then you can use, Hezbollah, Iran, Houthis, they're not distinguishing from, Israel's only using American-made weapons on the, helpless Palestinian population trapped in Gaza. Like, no, they're going to be using them also against, and have been using them on the border against Hezbollah and in Lebanon. Can you just quickly explain for those of us who have not been paying attention what this attack in the Golan Heights recently has meant for the region? Like these 12, I think, Druze children, Israel says they why is it so contested? And also, like, no one has claimed responsibility over this, and Israel sort of used that as a precondition to attack more on Lebanon.
Very quickly, both Israel and the U.S. government came out and said that this was Hezbollah. The speed in which the Biden administration did was quite impressive, mindful of the fact that they've still been investigating attacks against hospitals in Gaza that occurred 8 months ago and still haven't been able to figure out who did that. But it took them less than 12 hours to come out conclusively and say that this was Hezbollah. Now, there's never been any Hezbollah attacks against that specific area. We have seen that the Iron Dome in that area apparently has malfunction in the past. And there are eyewitnesses that are saying that it wasn't a missile, it was a malfunction of the air defenses. I don't know where the evidence lies on this, but at this point, it's become irrelevant.
Sure.
In the sense that the Israelis have used that as a pretext to go after the number two in Hezbollah, and the U.S. has completely endorsed it and supported and telling that, they have a right to defend themselves. So again, we're seeing this pattern repeating over and over and over again. And then, the lazy mainstream media keeps on saying that Biden has been fighting to secure a ceasefire for the last couple of months. This is complete nonsense. He's fighting to get a ceasefire that is on Israel's term. And Israel doesn't want the ceasefire. And as a result, there is no ceasefire. If Biden was pushing for a ceasefire based on what's in U.S. interest, and because he actually truly is serious about it, then he would have shut off arms deliveries to Israel a long time ago and forced them into a ceasefire. Yeah. He's not even been willing to consider that. And as long as he's not willing to consider his leverage, saying that he's been trying to get a ceasefire is just completely disingenuous.
Absolutely. And I think, what's crazy when you really understand Iran vis-a-vis Israel is that Iran is the country that has been forced to and has shown utmost restraint when it comes to provocations from Israel, when it comes to, killing scientists, releasing all kinds of, viruses into their computing systems, and decade after decade after decade. And then, the attack on the embassy in the Syrian embassy in Tehran earlier this year. And then, of course, now this. So it's like each time the world just kind of waits on Iran to not do anything. And you're saying this time it could be different, even though, and maybe you can talk a little bit about this new president, Pezeshkian, Masoud Pezeshkian, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, who is
surprisingly well, actually.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, who's maybe a moderate.
So a lot to unpack. Let me just start off by saying you're quite right. The Iranians and the Israelis have been involved in a dirty war for several years now, in which behind the scenes there's been a lot of attacks. But the overwhelming number of attacks have been the Israelis striking the Iranians. And this is mostly because they have the capacity and the Iranians don't have the same intelligence, the same reach, etc., etc. What's fascinating is that when the Iranians respond, that's when the New York Times tends to have an article about it. And then at the bottom of the article, they do mention in an obscured way that this was preceded by 9 other Israeli attacks. Just take a look at the coverage on Israel and Lebanon. There's a quick impression you would get it by reading headlines. You would think that the Israelis have been bombarded with missiles from the Lebanese side. And to a certain extent, there certainly has been attacks by the Lebanese. But up until last week, 83% of the attacks and the projectiles were flying from Israel into Lebanon, not the other way around. No one would ever get that impression reading US mainstream media.
Yeah.
Instead, you're getting the impression that the Israelis are under attack and they're just defending themselves, whereas the overwhelming number of attacks are actually coming from the Israeli side. Now, as to Masoud Pezeshkian, he is, within the context of the Iranians, definitely a moderate. He is not a moderate in terms of the internal politics of seeking, or let me put it this way, he's not a revolutionary or anti-revolutionary within the Iranian context, in the sense that he's, vowing to take down the regime and right. The supreme leader's position. He's gone out of his way not to come across as that.
Wouldn't be president if he did.
He wouldn't be president, exactly. But, it's interesting, the last couple of elections in Iran prior to Raisi, the ones who presented themselves as anti-establishment were the ones who were winning, whether they were conservative leaning or not. So, for instance, Ahmadinejad was conservative, but he actually really presented himself as anti-establishment. And the person he ran against the first time around was Rafsanjani, who was an old revolutionary hand, the personification of the establishment at the time. And that's part of the reason why he won that surprise election.
So elections are fairly free in Iran?
No, they're not fairly free. At the end of the day, there's this limited number of people that are allowed to run because of the intervention of the Guardian Council. Right. But within those who are allowed to run, it actually tends to be quite free and quite competitive. Now, there was definitely election fraud in 2009. And in 2021, when Raisi won, they didn't need to engage in any election fraud because they didn't allow anyone else that really could challenge Raisi to run. They wanted to maximize the likelihood that there wouldn't be any surprises. So they didn't allow any potent candidates to run to challenge him. But in this last election, I don't think there was any cheating in that sense. And Pezeshkian did win. The other candidate was extremely conservative and hardline, but the participation rate was still relatively low, only about 50%. And that's part of the reason that, the people are very tired of the system. And Pezeshkian did not present himself as anti-establishment. He definitely wanted to change a lot of things, but he didn't really take on that type of a branding deliberately. And that was a turnoff for a lot of voters.
Mm-hmm.
But as to your other question,
yeah.
What does it mean? Well, you actually have a senior team of diplomats coming into the Iranian government now, who are the people who negotiated the 2015 nuclear deal. These are people who are actually, first-rate international diplomats, very effective, quite constructive. They've shown that they can make compromises, they can keep them, all of those different things, which meant that there was a window of opportunity for the US and Iran, if the Biden administration was interested, to actually explore renewed diplomacy. That window has also essentially been shut close, at least in the short term, as a result of what Netanyahu did. And I do not think that that's a coincidence. He could have taken out Haniya at almost any time. He knew exactly where he was in Doha. And he also knew there are other moments that he had been visiting Tehran in which they hadn't done this. I think they did this very deliberately on the inauguration in order to sabotage any prospects for U.S.-Iran diplomacy.
And it's in line with what Israel has done in the region throughout the decades, right? Which is killing moderates. They kill moderates, and so does the U.S. The U.S. loves killing moderates. Anyone who, I mean, it's in part like the Iraq War approach was like, we're going to kill all the Baathists. Well, the Baathists were actually like kind of moderate, and like, I mean, not, you know what I'm saying? Like you could work with them in some ways, and then
the U.S. had worked with them,
and they had exactly supported them.
CIA's, in close contact with the CIA in the 1970s.
Right.
And the perfect example is actually Hamas itself. Hamas came into existence partly through direct support of Israel back in the 1980s, when then PLO head Yasser Arafat, also certainly in today's context a moderate, was someone that they were more fearful of. And they wanted to divide the Palestinians, and doing so by helping create this organization that took on a religious dimension. And then, of course, relatively soon they lost control over it and started assassinating the heads of Hamas. And they have assassinated several of them, including the founder back in 2004, if I'm not mistaken. And it hasn't made any difference in terms of the organization's structure, efficiency, et cetera, because at the end of the day, as long as the occupation continues and the repression of the Palestinian people continues, there are going to be movements such as Hamas that will pop up, whether it's Hamas itself or a variation of it or Hamas 2.0.
Yeah, and it's interesting because early on, Antony Blinken was publicly saying there is no military solution for Hamas. He quickly reined that in and stopped talking about. I literally cannot find this clip. I've been trying to find it. I think it was on Face the Nation. And it was like maybe a month after October 7th. And he was like, look, ultimately, there's no military solution for this. And it's like, yes, exactly. They're all horribly dishonest about all of this.
I think the history of this 10 years from now, when more documents will come out, will shock us. I think there is a lot of shame. There's a lot of truly indignified behavior by the US government that still has not come to light. We may also find out that there were other areas in which they actually pushed back. But bottom line is, they can push back in a way that is effective. They have chosen, by and large, not to do so because we have not seen any change in Israeli conduct.
Yeah, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I did want to ask you, I think for a lot of people, they don't understand actually how critical like Israel-Palestine is to the region. And I think when you see, well, obviously the death wish that Israel has, I mean, the World War III wish that they have, and someone like Netanyahu at the head, that becomes really clear of how much this can be a wider war. But you see the Houthis, right? Gaining all of this, all these acolytes and all this like praise and good PR because of their attacks on Israel or their attacks on Red Sea shipping lines and all this, because they are saying, we're standing up for Palestinians. To what extent do roads lead through truly finding a solution? Whatever, a Palestinian state, a one-state solution, a simple ceasefire. Like, to what extent do all roads lead through Israel-Palestine? Because I think some people don't understand just how critical it is. They think that Hezbollah, Houthis, Hamas, Iran would still be the exact same as they would be even if there were a Palestinian state. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, no, I think you raise a very important point. I do believe that, so for instance, for the Iranians to be able to come to some sort of a coexistence with Israel is next to impossible unless there is a Palestinian resolution, a Palestinian state, something that is viable and that the Palestinians themselves are content with. And same thing is true for some of the other organizations. There's some who, like ISIS and Al Qaeda, it doesn't matter. They'll
Sure.
continue to do what they're doing.
Sure.
But those are in a very different category. And that's a level of radicalism that, frankly, is a direct result of US military interventions in the region, including the Iraq invasion, which would not have, ISIS would not have been created had it not been for that.
Yeah.
So I think it's extremely crucial. I want to, at the same time, be very careful not to leave the impression that if you solve that, everything else will be fine. There will still be plenty of other challenges and problems. There's a fundamental problem because there isn't a security architecture in the region. There's no security bodies for the region. You don't have the OECD as you do in Europe, although that's now more or less defunct. You don't have the ASEAN. None of those things have been established. And frankly, that is also, I would put some of the blame at the feet of US foreign policy, because instead of trying to help the region reach such inclusive bodies for security management, the US has been pushing for bloc formation. We get the Israelis and the Saudis together as a counter to the Iranians. So as long as you play that game, you actually prolong the period in which there will not be a unified security architecture in the region.
Right.
I think a lot of people are misjudging what happened in the last decade. Because of the Arab Spring, there was a lot of eyes that went inwards, and people were more concerned about what was happening in their own country. And as a result, in 2014, when the Israelis were bombing Gaza, the biggest protest against that actually took place in Barcelona and in London, rather than in the Middle East itself. Today, I think we're much closer to the old normal, in which the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is very much central. No government can ignore it. And many governments are extremely concerned for their own safety, because if this goes on much longer, eventually the unhappiness of the populations are going to start targeting their own governments, because they're not doing that much. And I think Jordan is in a very precarious situation precisely for that reason.
Yeah. Last question. American boots on the ground, Netanyahu openly flaunted. And it was, to me, maybe, I mean, it's a big contest for what was the most disgusting part of his speech. But for me, flaunting this idea that we've killed all of these Palestinians for you, we've done all of this dirty work for you, and you didn't even have to get your hands dirty at all. And it's like, first of all, our hands are completely, caked in blood. However, it was so cynical. And also, I think, according to a lot of your writing, very untrue when it comes to U.S. legacy in the Middle East. And every time you're playing with fire, you're just, one attack away from American troops on the ground. So what are your thoughts?
Absolutely. And I think you pointed to something very important in his speech. His entire speech was to sell the idea that he's not really just doing this for Israel. He's doing this for America.
Right.
And he was essentially trying to sell the idea that my interest is your interest.
Yes.
We're not just on the same side. We're the same thing. And allowing for that type of an argument to go unanswered, for that notion to be accepted, is extremely dangerous. It's actually part of why the US is so embroiled in so many different conflicts in the region. If you read mainstream think tanks reports, and if they even have a section talking about what is US interest in the region, if you read a Quincy report, it's like 2-3 things. That's it. Very narrow. When it comes to the mainstream, they're listing like 10 different things. And then the last point is standing by our allies. Our interest is to stand by our allies. Well, that then suddenly means that their interest is our interest. Their conflicts are our conflicts.
Yep.
And if you adopt that, well, then no surprise that the US is embroiled in so many completely needless conflicts that have nothing to do with us. But this is what Netanyahu was selling and has been selling for quite some time. And he's very astute to understanding what works in the US and doesn't. He understands the sensitivity that exists right now about American boots on the ground. So, for instance, first day of the conflict of Ukraine, Biden came out and said there will not be any boots on the ground in Ukraine, American boots, because he realized the minute American body bags came home from Ukraine, support for Ukraine would collapse within weeks.
Right.
Because that's where the country is right now. Netanyahu understands this, and instead he says, I'm fighting it for you so your soldiers don't have to die. It is completely disingenuous. He's dragging us into another major war right now.
Yeah, and getting the most support from Republicans, who are arguably even more vociferous about forever wars because they're so good at co-opting it.
Yes.
And they're in this like American isolationism, fake
but I have to say
isolationism.
something that's going to be really interesting.
Yeah.
A lot of supporters of Trump supported him because he spoke so forcefully against the forever wars. He criticized the Iraq War. He criticized the Bush family when they were on the stage and in the audience in the North Carolina primary back in whatever it was, 2015. And he tapped into a very strong anti-war sentiment that exists whether you're on the left or the right.
Right.
But what happened in the Republican side is that it's like, yes, no more forever wars, no more unnecessary entanglements with Israel in the Middle East, unless it's for Israel, like a big exception for Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. But now I think they come to a point in which you have very major voices on the Republican side that because they have adopted the notion that we really shouldn't be involved in wars that have nothing to do with us, we really shouldn't just be going around places, taking out regimes and, spreading democracy, etc. Once they really bought into that, then the idea of making an exception for it, for the one country that is most likely to drag us into wars, drag us into forever wars, eventually the cognitive dissonance becomes too strong and they start turning away against that. And that's what I think you've seen with someone like Tucker Carlson. And he's a very influential figure on the right. What you're hearing him saying is actually more of a consistent view of what the foreign policy should be and an unwillingness to make this massive exception in the case of Israel.
Honestly, I've agreed with you. I agree with you, and I've given him credit for at least being a consistent, rabid. I mean, the isolationism is all rooted on why don't we sick the military on our own people / on the border? Like, they don't care. And Trump was always like, why didn't we take more oil? And none of it is any respect for regions. But you're totally right. And call it his overwhelming anti-Semitism, like actual anti-Semitism that he doesn't want to support Israel, but at least he is consistent. And you're absolutely right. Sadly, the hypocrisy is lost on the rest of the Republicans. And we'll see if Kamala Harris can, turn this one around. I mean, it is a lot, especially if the infrastructure for a World War III is already set up, should she beat Trump, for her to inherit.
And so what you're pointing to is part of what I think is Netanyahu's calculation. He came back from Washington and he saw that Kamala Harris' body language, tone, rhetoric was very different.
Yep.
Now, I'm not saying that's enough. Policy change is policy change. It's not just rhetorical and tone change. But if you're Netanyahu, you're worried about it.
Yeah.
And then you recognize, if I actually manage to start a war before she becomes president, before she has an opportunity to take an initiative on her own, I can corner her and just force her into a bear hug and force her to react to the crisis I create instead of allowing her to take initiative on her own.
Yes.
And I think that's part of his calculation here. Seeing the disarray in American politics, seeing the opportunity of essentially cornering, whether it's Trump or Kamala Harris, was too tempting for him. And this is part of the reason why they did something as audacious as assassinating the negotiator of Hamas while he was at the presidential inauguration of the Iranian president.
Why does Israel care about Iran? Why? They're already slowly annexing all of the West Bank. What do they want? Maybe I'm stupid. I'm just like, why?
No, look, from a geopolitical standpoint, the Israelis have legitimate concerns with Iran, and Iran has legitimate concerns with Israel. Is it dramatically exaggerated? Yes. Is it an existential threat in either side? No. Neither side is actually an existential threat. The Iranian regime and its own conduct internally is far greater of an existential threat to Iran than what Israel can do. And similarly, what the Israelis are doing.
Totally.
What Israel is doing is driving itself towards a civil war right now. It's far more dangerous to them than what the Iranians can or have been doing. But they are embroiled in a geopolitical rivalry, which again tends to become much worse when there is no security architecture in the region. There is no functioning diplomacy. I personally do think that there's a way of resolving that. One necessary step of it, of course, is some sort of arrangement with the Palestinians. I don't think these two countries are destined to be at war. I don't think the war is inevitable. But when you have actors like Netanyahu, who has a very clear political interest to escalate, then you will see the kind of things that we're seeing right now.
Okay, to Biden's credit, didn't he, one of his last cogent speeches, I mean, not last.
What was that?
Yeah. Well, he's very cogent around NATO. He gets real up in arms about NATO. But didn't he float some sort of NATO for the Middle East?
That's a terrible idea. That goes back. That goes back to what I was mentioning earlier on.
Like
Dividing the
Arab
region
Accord.
in different blocks, calling one of the blocks a peace bloc, a defensive alliance, instead of actually having an inclusive security arrangement
Right.
that actually includes everyone. It's not targeting anyone. So if you take a look at the Arab NATO that he had, or the Iran Accord Plus with Saudi Arabia and Israel, it's targeting someone. It's
Right.
an alliance to target the Iranians or the Iraqis, etc.
Like NATO as a target on Russia.
Exactly. And then you had the alternative to it, which was the Baghdad dialogue that the Iraqi government was running up until a couple of years ago, in which they brought everyone in the region except the Israelis to the table. And the Saudis and the Iranians were talking to each other as part of the reason why they managed to normalize relations later on. It was inclusive. It wasn't targeting anyone.
Mm-hmm.
A NATO or some sort of a military alliance of that kind is exact wrong type of thing if you want to have a long-term security in the region. And unfortunately, those are the ideas that we're constantly exporting out of Washington to the Middle East.
Ugh. Okay, well, I'm glad you're correcting him and me on that, because you're right. It's like, what kind of security apparatus? There should be one, but who it is staged against, or who it is, versus, what it's meant to do is important. Trita Parsi, you're wonderful. I always appreciate your analysis. And everybody, please go to the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Read. Trita's got, obviously follow. Tell us your handle again on.
Very simple. T Parsi. T as in Tom, Parsi.
Really always appreciate your long threads, even though that platform is awful. But you're not. So thank you so much, and have a good weekend.
Thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure.
All right. Take care. And thank you all for being here, for sticking around, because some real deep shit for a Friday, We're supposed to all just take a load off, but hey, World War III could happen and we don't want to miss it. A few thanks. Miss Callie, thank you for your super sticker. Side Dyer Productions, MAGA is planning to stage terror attacks to blame Hamas, Iran, and the Democrats. Maybe. I mean, that's all it takes, right? Like, imagine if, the attempted assassination on Donald Trump were done by anyone who wasn't a white registered Republican man, right? It would have been war on those people. I mean, look, I think that all you need is the pretext. All you need is, and Trita's written a lot about this before, but American soldiers dying who have already been targeted in the Middle East, stationed in Iraq still. And that's a pretext in and of itself. The reason that Trump touts that he would stop all these wars is because he would allow Netanyahu to nuke Gaza and annex all of the West Bank. Now, what that would do, obviously, would lead to even more people joining groups like Hamas, more ISIS, more extremism, right? And then you just continue to sell weapons to destroy those people, no matter where they are, and destabilize the region continually. But, hey, you always have, again, the barrel of a gun. You always have your missiles. You always have the Iron Dome. Like, it's never ending. So it's funny because you're like, the idea that Donald Trump wants diplomacy is wild, right? And that it's like, no, there would be peace under you, but only for some people and only for a very short amount of time. But again, with Democrats like these, with the Bidens in charge, we are so effed on this. And I think, and we didn't talk about Trita, but I don't know if we know the full extent to which the U.S. has been involved in all of these, all of the actions that Israel has been taking. And one thing I'm heartened by is that, again, Kamala Harris has, and I meant to tell this to Trita to flex that I knew what I was talking about, but Phil Gordon, who actually from the American side who is a Mideast advisor to Kamala Harris on the American side, was pivotal to the Iran nuclear deal from our end. And Trita has written recently that all the action in Tehran, the assassination, has only further cemented the idea in the Iranian mind in government, but also among the people, that they should have a nuke. Because if Israel's about to pop off a war with you and you don't have a nuke, right? Like, they can do whatever they want. And so there's that is a deterrent, right? It's awful, but that is the calculation when you're a country that doesn't have nuclear weapons. And so he's saying, and is writing, look, this is, the longer this goes, and like I said, man, January 2025 could not come fast enough, especially if we defeat Donald Trump. If Donald Trump is the victor, you guys can wait on January. What is January 2025? Let's just commit mass suicide now. Drink my Kool-Aid. But like, you know what I'm saying, right? And I did want to, like, Obama was the deporter in chief. Obama also drone striked the F out of the Middle East, even though Donald Trump increased the number of drone strikes by 400%, I believe the figure was. But I do want us to remember, like, part of what Obama did was continue the infrastructure and apparatus that was handed to him from 8 years of a warmongering, psychotic Bush administration, both on the U.S.-Mexico border and the entire infrastructure around mass deportations and the and ICE, and funneling more and more money into that, into DHS, again, created after 9/11. And so that was all raring to go. Same thing with the drone program. What Obama should have done was de-escalate those and basically wind them down. Say, this is not in our interest in the Middle East. This is not in our interest on the U.S.-Mexico border. Let's wind these programs down. But he was chicken shit, and he basically was like, okay, deploy, let's go. But again, he didn't from jump set up those structures. It's important to know that, but he didn't rein them in. Same thing with Kamala Harris. If she inherits this, if she wins, if she inherits this fucking mess, she needs to de-escalate it. And hopefully she will not continue with Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, not continue Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, like, axe these mofos. Rachel Atwood said, the scandal over the Algerian boxer Imani Khalif was started by a Russian boxing official who were mad that she beat their top Russian boxer last year. That's so on brand. Yes, that's so on brand for Russia. Which, by the way, if you guys need to, like, what a dumb fucking storyline. I'm going to be talking about it in a little bit on TYT. Things might get a little bit testy. But the International Olympics Committee issued a statement about Iman Khalif, as well as the Taiwanese player, basically saying that they are female, they pass their standards, and that the International Boxing Federation or organization basically arbitrarily, in the middle of the 2023 competition, disqualified both of these players, with no parameters, no tests, nothing based on, like, what T levels they had. It was simply a unilateral decision from the head of the boxing league. So they're basically calling out the boxing league. And again, forgive me if I don't remember exactly the boxing league, whatever, because they're like, no, these players deserve to be competing. And what, fuck you. So, like, big ups to the Olympic Committee a little bit, and also standing against, like, all players deserve to compete without hate and bigotry. And oh my God, what a ridiculous storyline this whole thing was. If you're just following it, hey, gender science is as bad as race science. If you think race science is bad, take a look at gender science. Also bad. Also leads to discrimination and antagonizing people and hate crimes and all kinds of like hierarchical, normative fucked up stereotypes that are then implemented in real life. Like, it's bad. If this week, the theme of this week is race science bad, hello Trump, gender science bad, hello entire internet against these athletes. Robert says, will we see Democrat Joe Biden fight a war with Iran with Republican support? Dude, maybe. Honestly, maybe. I mean, every American president has basically been embroiled in some sort of war in the Middle East. So, I mean, I guess Biden did one better, and he got a genocide. He got a whole ass genocide. But it's just fucking wild to me that Biden he can't do this. He's not able to project strength, and he doesn't want to, because he's like, nah, Israel can do whatever they want. I like Netanyahu. He's fine. He brings his dirty laundry to be laundered by American staff, by the White House staff. Dragon Slayer, Slayer Dragon. Every day is a celebration. Every day is a battle. Indeed. Isn't that the truth? Thank you so much, Chris Huggy, for resubscribing. 17 months strong. So happy to be part of this community. Oh, thank you for being part of it. Late Bloomer 66 also resubscribed. Thank you so much. Mr. Nix also 2 days ago over on Twitch. You guys, a couple announcements I wanted to make. Actually, just one, which is that in Chicago, we sold out our early stand-up show on Tuesday, August 20th. So we added a late show, 9 p.m. We are going to be doing 2 shows back to back. It'll be fun. It'll be so good. So 9 p.m. late show. Get your tickets, everyone. They are going fast. And definitely there's still tickets available for Monday's Bad Hezbollah Habituation Room live show, which I believe we will record as a podcast and we'll put out for everyone to hear. But if you're a patron, you'll absolutely get the first bite at the apple. So patreon.com/habituationroom. $5, $10 gets you that shout out during the Le Fart song. But I'm going to make this case, but I'm going to make it to you. The last thing I'll say about what happened in the Olympics, and I'm sorry, I didn't prepare the story for it, but basically a Italian boxer faced this other boxer from Algeria, and she got hit in the head real hard. And 45 seconds into the game, into the match, the battle, into the match, she was like, I'm out. I tap out. No more. I got hit really, really hard. I don't like it. Bye. She now says that she wishes she would have shaken Imani Khalif's hand, because by not doing so, it looked like she had some sort of problem with her as a person or as an athlete, but she didn't. She was just really shaken by like the blow she received. So it's like, okay. And she's now like, basically like, how, stop making me the victim for your anti-trans crusade, as if Imani Khalif is trans in the first place. And the reason, I mean, people are sending this to me because I defend trans people in all aspects of life. I have the fucking audacity / humanity to do that because I don't fucking care. I want people to be free of hate and being barred from doing what anyone else can. You're already an Olympic athlete. You're doing what only a small subsect of people could even do, and you're trans. More power to you. I don't give a shit. Truly, I don't give a shit. I think you should live your truth as an athlete and as a person. But Imani Khalif, because everyone's so fucking interested, has something called DSD, which is differences of sex development. Not all women with high testosterone. It's not all women with high testosterone. It's not even all women who have a Y chromosome. This is a very specific subset where the common factor is you have a Y chromosome and you have high levels of naturally occurring testosterone that your body can use. DSD. Now we've all learned something, gender science psychopaths. So that's what people are referring to. She's not intersex even. She's a woman, born biologically female, and has DSD. So she has more elevated levels of testosterone. But people, on Wednesday, on our bonus episode, you'll hear me because we talked about Ilona Mar, who is a jacked U.S. American rugby player who won the team, helped win the team the bronze, the first time Americans have won in rugby, female rugby. And people were calling her a man because she's jacked and she's huge and she's a rugby player. Of course she's going to be jacked and huge. People were calling her a man. So what do you want? Every time you go down this road of what is a woman? What is a man? Shall we? Of course, nobody cares about, trans men competing. Ha 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 ha. What is the estrogen's going to help you? Yes, it will. Every time we go down this road, we end up not only being anti-trans bigots, but we also end up policing women's bodies and what they can look like and what they can sound like and what kind of muscle mass they should have and what their weight should be and how strong they should be. It's so disingenuous. Nobody cares about women's sports. Nobody actually cares about women. All they care about is shitting on trans people and anyone who doesn't conform to their normative gender ideas. Period. I swear to fucking God. I'm so sick of this conversation. It is so endless to me. Trans rights are human rights. End of story. Goodbye. And I know you all know that. I just need to make it clear for all of the fucking weird gender science obsessed. Yeah, I said it. You're weird. You're weirdos. You're creepy. You're weird. Yeah, if you were suddenly in a woman's body, you would go into a restroom and look at everyone pee. Yeah, and I will pull out my tampon and bop you on the nose with it. And with that, you guys have a great fucking weekend. I fucking love you. Thank you for your support of this show. We've got a great show on Tuesday. Paris Marks is back. We're going to talk about how Bitcoin is going all in on Donald Trump. Love y'all.